Welcome to Fraser 365. I'm Will Adams, Media Director at Fraser Church in Montgomery, Alabama. And during these weeks, I'm going to be doing a series of interviews for our daily devotional. This week, I'm here with Jerrod Dorminey, who is our Minister of Music and Worship. And each day, I'll be asking him a different question. So today's question is there a passage of Scripture that you are wrestling with currently?
Yeah, there's several actually. My wife and I have been recently going through the book of Hosea together, and there's just a lot in Hosea where it talks about worshiping idols and all of these things. And I think if the American church would replace the word idols with financial wealth or security or comfort or all of these things, we'd start to have such a much broader, like a better picture of where we are in relationship to what a biblical Christian looks like. I digress. That's not the one really that's been hitting me the most right now. And what's been hitting me the most right now is actually a story that probably, if you've been in the church for a while or any length of time, is somewhat familiar to you. It's where Jesus walked on water out towards the boat that the disciples were on, and Peter recognizes him and steps out of the boat and walks on water himself. And there's a lot of things to break down about this story, but there's one phrase in particular that's really kind of jumped off the pages at me really the past week. John the Baptist had just been beheaded. Jesus was trying to get away for prayer after that happens. But then all the crowds follow him. And so then you see Jesus and his disciples, Jesus having empathy for these people that have followed him out. And so they end up feeding the 5,000, this miracle that happened. And then Jesus again retreats for prayer. But right before he retreated for prayer, it says that he insisted his disciples get on the boat and head to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. And I thought that's such interesting language because of what happens in that story. If you know about the story, the disciples go out on the sea. And as it tends to happen in the Sea of Galilee because of the way the land is, the hills are up higher, and I believe the Sea of Galilee is actually like 700 feet below sea level. And so it just, this wind and all of these things come together to create these storms. And so the disciples leave land where they were secure and safe. I'm using air quotes. You can't see it because this is audio. But they go out onto the sea, and then wouldn't you know it, that night, a big storm comes up on them, and they're terrified, and they're clinging to the side of the boat. They're just in a really bad spot. So Jesus had insisted they leave security, aka the land, to go out into the sea where they would be hit with wind and waves and the storm. And in that moment, Jesus sees them and comes walking out to them. And all the disciples freak out, as all of us would when we see this creature walking on the water out towards us. And Peter recognizes it's Jesus and calls out to him, "Lord, if it's really you, tell me to get out of the boat." And so Peter steps out of the boat and steps onto the water and begins walking towards him. But then just for a moment, Peter takes his eyes off of Jesus and begins to sink. And so then Jesus reaches out and pulls him up. And then he says this phrase, and this is the phrase that's really got me. He says, "O ye of little faith." Now, a lot of times we, in the modern church, we kind of dog on Peter for this, like, "Oh yeah, you have little faith," or whatever. But that phrase actually just translates a phrase which can be paraphrased as "thou half believer," or someone whose faith isn't fully mature. And when I learned that, that's why it's so important to do some word searches and understand a little bit more about the original context, is "thou half believer" has just hit me. Where is it in my life that I'm just a half believer? There's so many times where I believe God can do something in my heart, but then I actually kind of question, can he do that? Or where is he calling me to go? Or maybe the person listening to this, where is he calling you to go, but you're just kind of afraid to step out? Where are you a half believer that if the Lord sends you somewhere, he can equip you, he can be with you? I don't really have, I guess it's kind of open-ended, but that's the phrase that I've really been wrestling with. Where in my faith am I just a half believer? And where do I need to step out of the boat a little bit more so that I can become more of a whole believer instead of a half believer?
I think it's a good question for all of us to ask.